Okay, so we learned a little bit about composition. Let's talk about how we actually light stuff inside of our program. Now, the fourth bubble in here you haven't really looked at yet is our viewport shading, which gives us our lighting preview. And this is going to light an object. I don't want this material anymore. Let's get rid of that. This is going to light an object based on what is in the scene. Here I have my camera, meaning if I rendered it by going up to render image, which is this, it's going to render that exact viewport of that camera. Now I can control where that camera is in a couple different ways. Let's select this camera and press this button, which is toggling the camera view. It's also numpad 0. And that zooms in on where my camera is looking. How do we move the camera? Well, we could move it physically, just like any other object, but it's a little hard to tell how we're moving it. So instead, there's a trick that we can pilot that camera directly. Hit N to get into your N panel here. If you go down to View, we can click Camera to View. This means it's going to lock the camera to whatever our view is. So now if I use my regular middle, shift middle, and control middle, I can actually change where I'm looking at this object. So that's pretty cool. Let's turn that off so that I can zoom out and kind of get back into my regular view. I can do the same thing by just clicking in and out of this too, though. And let's take a look at some of these lights. Now, when I'm working inside of a scene like this, what I like to do is make two viewports, one for my camera and one for just navigating around. It turns out it's super easy to do that in Blender. We're going to go into this upper right-hand corner of our viewport window here, which is just this area. And when it comes to this double crosshair, I can just left mouse click and drag, and I have a second window. If you ever click too many of these, which happens to me all the time, all you have to do is hover over this double arrow, right click, join areas, and then just pick what side to join up. So this one, I'm going to toggle the camera view, and I'm going to hit N, and I'm going to hit T, and I'm going to turn off this little widget. So all I'm seeing is just my camera and my lights. So that in this scene, I can be moving stuff around and changing my lighting and just seeing how it's affecting my image. So let's talk about a 3-point lighting scheme. I got my camera here, which means my fill should be either to one side or the other. And if I set my light properties over here, you can see I can set its intensity, like how strong it is, and it's in watts. So let's set it to something higher, like 20,000. You can see how intense that light really is. That's way too high. I'm going to set it to like 7,000, I think. So something like this, and now we can move it around and see how its light is affecting the object. The cube's not very interesting, so let's actually replace this. Shift A, Mesh, and UV Sphere. UV Sphere is a little sharp right now, so you see it's got this weird faceting. This is because all of the edges are what we call sharp shaded or shaded flat, which is that mode. If I right click on any object, I can say shade smooth, and instead it's going to create a nice smooth gradation. But say I've got, for instance, just as an example, I want to take a ring of these and let's E and let's scale it out. And I actually want some of these edges to be sharp. Well, I can do that by selecting a group of edges, Control E, and then we can say mark sharp. And this is going to affect the shading. E, mark sharp, E, mark sharp, and do it down here. And then when I have that, in this same menu, this little green menu with the 3 dots, which is sort of our mesh, it's our icon for mesh, we come down to normals and we can turn on auto smooth. And either this will happen automatically, but if you set it to 180, whatever you marked as sharp will be sharp and whatever you marked as smooth will be smooth. So this is just a way that we can denote that. So if I take this guy again here and instead I clear sharp, you'll see that stays smooth shaded and these stay sharp shaded. Roundabout way of just showing you how you can actually make something look relatively smooth. I'm going to put an UV sphere in here, just going to shade it smooth. And so we can see there's areas of light and there's areas of shadow. Right now I'm just using a point light, but it's a good start for what I want to do. And I usually start my lighting schemes out with point lights anyway. So we have our object and it's pretty dark on the other side, but we can fix that too by hitting Shift D to duplicate. And I can move another light over to the other side, just navigating it around and kind of positioning it where I want it. This is pretty intense because it has the same intensity the other one, so I'm going to set it a lot lower, like 3,000. And now I have a second light that's able to create maybe a band across it, maybe a second lighting scheme, or get it further away and just create like a subtle underlight to everything. And the last thing I want is like a strong rim. So something to help it set apart from the background. So let's give ourselves a little stage here because it's a little boring right now. I'm going to take this, this sphere. I'm going to lift it up off the ground a little bit. I'll definitely need to reposition my camera. So let's go back into this, get into my camera, go to view, camera to view, and position it a little bit better. Like that. Turn camera to view back up. Click the camera guy. And now I want to create a background. I'm going to take a plane and I'm going to make it real big. Because this is basically our studio lighting setup that we're building here. And now I'm going to take this back edge, so 2, and E middle click just to drag it up. Select this edge and Control B, give it a couple divisions. Give me like a nice ramp here. Right click the whole thing and shade smooth. So that's simple enough. That's how I like to do these. Sort of a simple background. Just something behind the camera to give me some background to go with it. So I've got a couple lights here. Let's move this one back up so it's not like under the ground as much. And we're going to make another light, but this one's going to be behind the camera. So you can see now I'm positioning it, and this light is not only helping light my background, but you see by its position, so if I turn it off to hide it, it makes it a lot less interesting. But by adding it, I'm adding just this little key rim. And I actually think this rim light is always, to me, the most important light in a scene because it helps the object stand out from the background. Now, of course, lights don't just have intensity, they also have color. So a little yellow color adds a little bit of warmth to a composition. Not too much, just very subtle. And a little bit of blue, like I don't want to go like that, it's too much. Just a tiny tweak of blue still feels like white light, but it feels a lot, like I said, more sophisticated as a color. We could play with all kinds of color schemes to light it, but we should be complementing what we're doing on the shape and not kind of overdoing it. Shading wise too, we have more choices than just the color of an object in its material slot. Let's add a new material. I'm going to keep the base color white, but we can also choose stuff like its roughness value. We can make it nice and shiny, which is going to affect some of the different properties. Or we can make it metallic, which will get it to behave more like a metallic sphere would. Again, very different kind of look to what we're doing. And when I'm rendering this, I want to turn on a bunch of the Eevee render properties, because this is the renderer we're using. So over here in the little camera symbol is render properties, currently set to Eevee. You can use cycles, but cycles takes time to render out, but it produces really good results, but it takes time to process. And I like Eevee because it's real time and it's similar to what you're going to be using in a game engine, which is what I'm most used to. But you could turn on ambient occlusion, which is going to bake in some little shadows. Bloom gives us that little glow on things. Screen space reflections will actually reflect the environment everywhere. And you could turn on motion blur even though we're not moving anything. The rest of these are just fine, but by turning all these on, we start to see all the extra properties we can get. So turn metallic back off. I just want it to be a nice sort of shiny, smooth sphere to work with here. And I'm going to show maybe one more thing. Right now, these are all point lights, but I can change them to spotlights instead. And a spotlight gives me control over where the direction of this light is pointed. So it treats it exactly like a traditional spotlight. And by grabbing these lights, you see these little yellow kind of icons here. It helps me direct around where my light is actually going. Same thing, let's change you, spotlight. And so I can sort of pick out on the surface of this object by dragging it. And I can change the cone size, so make it more intense or more focused. So maybe this cone here by dragging that. It's like a more narrow kind of a cone. And there's so many things I can do with spot shape as well as the blending, like how soft or harsh that light is. These are all different sort of choices. You can see this little rim there is getting sharper or softer based on how soft that spot is. I think I'm going to go for a relatively soft lighting scheme on all of these. Adjust that cone a little bit, maybe that one too. And okay, yeah, this is a simple model. There's nothing to it. If it's a little segmented, I can add a material modifier called subdivision surface to sort of smooth out a couple edges. But even something this simple, lit well, is interesting to look at when you apply some composition rules as well as some lighting and color scheme kind of rules. And that's what I like to have two views, is I can move this here and still see how it's going to affect my final image. Now all I have to do is hit F12, which is going to render it out for me. And bam, I got my image, and I can save it as a file somewhere on my computer, usually as a ping. We don't need RGBA because it's going to give us like background transparency. Just RGB is fine, and any of these settings, and then save it, and now you have your image and you can post it. It's going to take your models to the next level and make everything look a lot more satisfying as a final composition. And we can always change the material back here too if I want. Create a new material, make it really dark so that the object stands out against a dark background. Or go really fun with it. And what is it going to look like if you choose a really intense color background and maybe even give that color background like a little emission here. So it's kind of glowing on its own, has a little bit of its own light to everything, like it's in a big light box or something. Emission we took off though. Or just say make it a flat color by changing principled BSDF to background, which is just going to give us a solid block of color to set our object against. Doesn't give us many of the shadows and information, but can be fun for a render as long as you don't choose anything too jarring. Remember, a little saturation goes a long way in a lot of these compositions. So play around with that, try some stuff out, and it's going to make your models look a whole lot better as a final product.